Hello and welcome to this session, the introduction to the IELTS speaking test, brought to you by Learning English 365. My name is Donna, and in this session today I'm going to give you an introduction to the speaking section of your IELTS exam. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the format and the structure of the test so you know what to expect when you're preparing for it. So let's get started. Here are some of the key things you need to know about the test from the outset. Okay, the test itself lasts from 11 to 14 minutes. That's all. Okay, it won't be less than 11 minutes and it won't be more than 14 minutes. There are 3 parts to the test, and we'll look at each part in a little bit more detail later on. You can't use a dictionary during the test, which is probably what you expected. Okay, so no Google Translate, no get your dictionary out, no app that you use to help you find that elusive word. Okay, none of that. Okay, this is all based on your own knowledge of English. And regardless of whether you're doing the academic test or the general training test, you will do exactly the same speaking exam. And it's the same questions and it's marked in exactly the same way. Okay, no differences here. Other parts of the IELTS test, there are differences according to whether you're academic or general training, but here for the speaking, there is no difference. So what will you have to talk about? It's quite nerve-wracking, isn't it, doing a spoken exam? So take some of the mystery out of it, some of the nerves out of it, by thinking about what you'll be asked to talk about. And on the screen there, you've got some subjects in the cloud bubbles. Have a look at them. Do you think they might feature in the test? Let's have a look, shall we? Your work or studies first. Yes, you may very well be asked for information about your work or studies. People you know. Yes, you're likely to be asked about people you know. Experiences you have had. Yes. What would make your city a better place? Yes. So that leaves 2 things now on the screen. We've got what was in the news last week and how to solve a mathematical problem. What do you think about those? Would they be asked in the IELTS speaking test? No, they wouldn't. Things about the news, whether last week, yesterday, last month, or things requiring technical knowledge, like how to solve a maths problem, they're not a feature of the test. The test is aimed at seeing how well you can communicate in English. It's not about your knowledge of current affairs or news that may happen in your country or another country, and it's not a test of your maths or any other technical ability for that matter. So all the questions that you will encounter during the speaking test will be about your own experience, about you, your own experiences, and also about your opinions or your points of view on a subject. So everything that is within your own knowledge, your own experience. It won't ask you specific information about a particular event or a particular problem or issue. So how is it marked then? Just like every other part of the IELTS test, you will get a score from 0, which means you didn't take the test at all, up to a 9, where you are deemed an expert user, with a full command of the English language, and that is native English speaker language. If you get an 8.5 or a 9, it's akin to being a native speaker. Like I just said, the speaking test measures how well you can describe yourself, your family, your own experiences, and how well you can express your own thoughts, points of view, feelings about a subject. Candidates that can express themselves on most subjects, but who still make quite a few mistakes, they'll probably get around a 5, okay, to give you some idea of the weighting. It's important that you understand and have found out what it is that you need to achieve in your specific situation. Requirements from universities and immigration agencies vary, and they vary between countries, so different countries have different requirements, but they can also vary between universities or institutions. As a general pointer, most students for undergraduate study will need at least a 6 on the band scores. For postgraduate study or immigration purposes, a band 7 is often required. But as I said, the most important thing is that you understand and you have found out what applies to you in your circumstances, because there are differences. So you need to be clear before you even think about booking your test. What is it that I'm expected to achieve for the purposes for which I'm migrating to an English-speaking country? Very, very important. So what will you be measured on? Have a think about someone that is not a native speaker of your language, but they're speaking to you. If you had to decide or assess how well they are speaking your language, what kinds of things would you listen out for, do you think? How would you deem how well they speak your language? I'm pretty sure that the things in your head are things like pronunciation, their vocabulary, their grammar, and also their ability to speak without hesitating too much. So you won't be surprised to know that those are also the kinds of things that the IELTS is looking for in the speaking test. And here we have on the screen the 4 criteria that examiners are measuring in the IELTS speaking. First of all, pronunciation. So are you saying the words correctly? It's not only about pronouncing the word, it's about also the intonation. If you're speaking a sentence, are you speaking like a robot, or are you speaking the natural ebb and flow to your words? Don't confuse pronunciation with accent. There are a range of English accents, as you will have come across in your speaking and your listening, and that's okay. There's also some differences in pronunciation, particularly between British English and American English. Tomato, tomato. And again, don't worry about that. Okay? Your pronunciation is the commonly accepted way of pronouncing a word, whether that's an American version or a British version, for example. It doesn't matter. The IELTS speaking isn't about everyone sounding exactly the same and having the same accent. That's maybe one myth that we can bust there. Lexical resource. This is about your vocabulary, your range of vocabulary. You are expected to have a wide range of vocabulary, but also that the vocabulary that you're using it accurately. and you're using words appropriately and in the right context. Grammatical range and accuracy, again, is it correct? But also, is there a wide range? Are you mixing up your tenses? Are you mixing simple sentences with more complex sentences? And fluency and coherence. Are you speaking naturally, a natural speed? Are your ideas connected one to the other? Is there a range of tenses? Are there a range of simple and complex sentences that work together to really enhance the flow of your speech? Each one of these has an equal weight in the test. So each one is worth 25%. And that's very important because to get a high score on your band here, you need to be excellent at each one. Don't practice one at the expense of another. If you know that you have an issue with your grammar and you struggle with grammar, then it's very important you spend time to improve it. Don't think, oh, my fantastic range of vocabulary, I know loads of words, I've learnt the dictionary off by heart, I know every single word there is, I'm fine. No. Your excellent vocabulary will not make up for deficiencies in your grammar. Each one needs equal attention from you. And to get that high mark, each one of these has to attract a high mark too. Let's look at each one of these in a bit more detail now. Pronunciation. You've got some words on the screen and a question and a statement. Can you say those words and the question and the statement correctly? So I'll read them for you. Photograph, measurement, breakthrough. What's your favourite film? I've had a delicious breakfast. Did you hear where I put the word stress and the sentence question stress? That is very important. As we've said, this is not about your accent, but this is about you speaking individual words and asking questions and speaking in sentences with the natural ebb and flow of speech, not speaking monotonously without showing any emotion in your words. And you will have done those exercises, I'm sure, in your language lessons, where by emphasizing a different word in a sentence can change the meaning of the sentence. Yeah? So we've got on screen, I've had a delicious breakfast. If I emphasize I've had a delicious breakfast. The emphasis there is on I've. So I, no one else in the room, I'm the one who had the delicious breakfast. Or I've had a delicious breakfast. I'm explaining to you that my breakfast I had was delicious as opposed to disgusting or tasteless. So we know that in English, when we change the emphasis, when we're speaking of different words, that can change the meaning of the sentence. So this is something that you can show off. You know, we use intonation to show how excited we are about something. We show it for emphasis, And also it adds interest to the way that we're talking. It helps our listener become engaged with what we're saying. So very, very important. Yeah. Not only your pronunciation, but your intonation and your ebb and flow of your speech. Make sure that you're speaking in a natural way. Sometimes when we're nervous, we do start speaking very quietly, very slowly, and we don't put any emotion into what we're saying. Please avoid that. Please avoid it. And you can avoid it by plenty of practice and making sure that you're speaking English normally during your practice. And to emphasize again, this is not about your accent. We all have different accents, and that's absolutely fine. Even candidates with what you might think have got quite a strong accent can still score highly on pronunciation. So don't worry too much about that if you have an accent. The examiner wants to see that your speech is easily understandable and what you're saying sounds natural. So that's the most important part, not what your accent may or may not be. Your lexical resource, your vocabulary. We've already said that you need a large vocabulary when you're doing the IELTS. And to get a high score, you'll need to show that. This is about being clever. It's not about using all those big, long words that you know. It's showing that you've got a good range of vocabulary. So there's always another word in English that means the same or has a very close meaning to the word that you're using. So try not to repeat the same words and phrases over and over again. Try and paraphrase what the examiner has asked you, for example. And if you introduce one idea and talk about something in one sentence, in your second sentence, try and use a synonym, try and use a different word for that word instead of keep repeating the same things. And on the screen here now, we've got a little exercise to do. So all the activity is to match the words on the left with their synonyms on the right. Can you do that? Let's have a look then. So we have car. What's another word for a car? It's quite an easy one, I think, to start. Yeah, automobile. Car and automobile. So whichever word you start with, if you're talking about cars or transport, instead of saying car, talk about automobiles, vice versa. Hot. Boiling. Boiling is another word for hot. And of course there are others, aren't there? Scorching, for example. Fast. Another adjective that means fast. Speedy. Yeah, well done. And there are other words. For example, rapid. Value as a verb. No, not the noun, the verb, to value. Yeah. Appreciate. And helpful. Another adjective that means helpful. Beneficial. So you can already see how you could make your speaking, your answers, your speech more interesting by just mixing up the words that you use. They mean the same, but they add that little bit of something to your speech. When we're speaking naturally, we don't just keep repeating the same words over and over again. Think about how you communicate in your own language. Next one. grammatical range and accuracy. To get that high band score, you do need to be able to form simple and complex sentences correctly, as I've said. You won't score highly if you play it safe. If all you speak is simple sentences without adding clauses, you will not get a high mark. And actually, that's not how we speak naturally anyway. We do mix up our sentences. And also, we mix up our tenses. It's not just about range, though. It is also about being accurate. So have a look at the sentences we have on the screen. We've got 5 there, and each one of those contains a mistake. Have a look. Can you spot the mistakes? There's more than one right way of saying these, depending on the context and the tense that you're speaking. Are we talking past? Are we talking present? Are we talking future? So there are a range of right answers, but I think we can all see that there's a mistake in each one of them. So number 1 then. The summer of 2012 have been very rainy. So what's the mistake? Yeah. It's not perfect. It's not the perfect tense here. It's the past simple. So the summer of 2012 was very rainy. If we're speaking in 2012, because we can say the summer of 2012 is very rainy. Number 2. Louisa wants for going to the beach next week. We take out the for. We lose the ing. Louisa wants to go. Louisa wants to go to the beach next weekend. Louisa wants to go. Yeah. Number 3. What's the correct way of saying this one? There are different ways of saying this correctly. Obviously, this is incorrect on the screen. There's a mix of tenses here. Are we talking in the past? Are we talking in the present? Are we talking about a one-off situation? Are we talking about something that happens generally? So it depends on what you're trying to say as to which would be the most appropriate correct answer. But some examples. When I'm in Turkey, I enjoy going to the market. During my time in Turkey, I enjoyed going to the market. When I'm in Turkey, I enjoy going to the market. When I was in Turkey, I enjoyed going to the market. Whenever I'm in Turkey, I enjoy going to the market. So, depends on the context. There are a range of right ways of expressing that. Number 4. The history was my favourite subject in school. We don't need the history here. It's a name. It's the name of the lesson, the name of the course. History was my favourite subject. You don't need the. And number 5. You could simply say, I called the man I met yesterday. I called up the man, maybe. It's not which. If you were going to put a relative pronoun there, you'd use who. I called up the man who I met yesterday. But in all honesty, in speech, you probably would just say, I called the man I met yesterday. So perfectly correct. And I suppose this is another little tip, is try not to make something overcomplicated. You know, if it's a simple sentence, It's a simple idea. Say it in the most simple way that you know. Don't try and overcomplicate what you're saying, because when you try and overcomplicate it, you make mistakes, and also it can be difficult to understand what you mean. Very important that, yes, you use a range of grammar, but that you're also accurate. Fluency and coherence, then. A fluent speaker, as I think we've established already, is someone who can speak naturally on a wide range of subjects. Going back to your language, how do you know that someone whose first language is another language speaks your language fluently? I think we've established already, haven't we, that a fluent speaker, a coherent speaker, speaks at a natural speed without much hesitation, doesn't really repeat words or phrases over and again, and uses connecting words to connect their ideas, to connect their sentences. Words like however, on the other hand, so, because, those words that enable the whole part of what you're saying to flow naturally, and also to give signposts to the person listening to you. If you say, for example, on the one hand, da da, you know, da da da, whatever, on the one hand, then you say, but on the other hand, the listener knows, the person is now going to contrast what they've just said with another argument, with the opposite argument, with a different point of view. So that it's very important, because it helps the person you're speaking to, your listener, to know, where are you going? We pick up, when we're listening, we pick up those clues, don't we? Those little verbal signposts of, I know where we're going next. If I say something to you, but then I say, but, you know, I'm going to change what I've just said. Example, I would love to come to your party next week, but, so you know I want to come, but I'm probably not coming. The but signals something. So it's really important, to show the fluency and coherence. Does everything you say, does it hang together? Do you capture my attention? Do I understand what you're talking about? Can I follow your argument or your point of view? Okay, let's look at the different parts of the test in a bit more detail now. Part 1 then. As we can see on screen, it lasts for around 4 to 5 minutes. This is the first part of the test, and everyone recognises that these speaking exams are a little bit nerve-wracking, even for the best speakers. I'm from the UK, I'm a native English speaker, but if I was going into this exam myself, and being asked some questions, someone I don't know, and I know I've only got less than 15 minutes to do it all, I would probably be a little bit nervous. Think about every exam that you've been in, every interview that you go to. We get a little bit nervous, don't we? And so this part of the test, it's a crucial, critical part of the test, but it's also there designed to help you settle in a little bit. So the questions that you'll be asked in this part of it will be about you, about your life. And you've got some typical examples of the types of questions that come up in the first part of the exam. Questions about where you live, whether you work or you're studying, and what it is that you're doing for a job, or what you're studying and what you think about it. What are your favourite sports or hobbies? Your favourite food? Films, music and books that you enjoy? And questions about your family and your friends. So everything that is within your own knowledge. So nothing that is tricky. Something that we've all got. We all live somewhere. We all work or we study. We've all got family of some description. And we've all have got things that we like to do in our spare time. So that's part one then. So quite straightforward. Part two. In part two, you'll be given a topic to talk about. And we've got an example on the screen of a cue card. And it's got a task on there. And it says, describe an interesting website you have visited. The card will also tell you what you need to cover. And you've got some bullet points on the right saying what you should talk about. So you should talk about when you visited the website, how you first learned about it, what it's about, and why you think it's interesting. And this part of the test will last between 3 and 4 minutes. What happens during this part of the test? Well, first of all, the examiner will give you the cue card and you'll have a minute to study it and to make notes about the subject, thinking about the bullet points that you've been given of the things that you need to cover. So use the time wisely to make your notes, your key words. What is it that you want to say? And then after that minute that you've had to prepare, you'll be asked to speak without interruption, okay, for like between 1 to 2 minutes. So almost like a mini presentation for the examiner. And once you've finished, once the examiner has stopped you, the examiner will ask you 2 or 3 questions about what you've said. Okay, just simple questions, maybe to clarify something, or to ask another question, an obvious lead question from what you've said. So that's that part of the exam. Part 3 is linked to part 2. And in part 3, you will be asked more questions that are related to the topic that you were asked to prepare. Okay? So there'll be more in-depth questions, really. And you will be asked about your thoughts and your opinions about the topic. And this will last again from between 4 to 5 minutes. In the example that we're using here, the question was about an interesting website you had visited. So the examiner might ask in part 3 some more in-depth questions related to that topic. And we've got some examples on the screen. Do you think young children should be allowed to access the internet? Should the government make high-speed internet accessible to everyone? So, it's questions that are in some way linked or related to the topic you were asked to prepare in the second part. And it's important, this is not a test. This is, again, I really want to emphasize this again and again. This is not a test of your opinions, okay, and your thoughts on a process. So, if you are asked these types of questions, sometimes it's okay if you think you have this question, maybe you've never thought of it. So B, for example, whether the government should make sure that everyone has access to high-speed internet. if you were asked that and you genuinely think, I've never even thought of it, it's not really an issue for me or where I live or my family, it's okay to say to the examiner, do you know, I haven't really thought about that. It's a very interesting question, and I've not really thought about it in much depth up to this point. It's okay to say that, and then say, but my first thought is, and say whatever you think. So again, to emphasize, this is not a test of your opinions. It's a test of your ability to communicate in English. So if you're asked a question that you think, I don't really have a strong opinion on, one way or the other, for example, whether young children should be allowed to access the internet, you don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other, it's okay to say that. And then explain why you don't have a strong opinion. It's okay to be honest. It's a conversation. This test is about how well you communicate in English. It's not a test of your opinions. And yes, I will say that over and over again because it's very important. Sometimes people get very nervous and worried that they'll be asked a question that they really have no opinion on. There's no need to worry about that. So then, moving on. How good does your English have to be to pass the speaking? Well, as we've already seen, there's no pass or fail in IELTS in any way. Everyone who takes the test is given a score, and there's no pass mark and there's no fail mark, because the score that you need to achieve varies according to country, as we've seen, and according to institution, university. So there is no pass or fail in that sense. Instead, the speaking test is measuring your level of English. So assuming that you do the test, if you don't do the test at all, you'll get a 0. But assuming that you do the test, and 99.9% of people who say they're going to sit the test do it, then you will get a score. And as you can see, that very advanced learners will normally get a 7 or 8, even if they make a few mistakes. And intermediate students will get a 5 or a 6. And we've seen that often, you should be aiming for at least a 6, generally speaking. The examiner is looking for you to express your thoughts. How well do you do that? How well can you explain about where you live, what your job is, what you like about something, what you dislike about something? Can you speak in natural sentences? And sometimes you will make a mistake. That's normal. That's also natural to make a mistake. And the examiner will only consider your mistakes serious if you keep making them. So throughout the test, you are making mistakes, or if they prevent the examiner from understanding what you're trying to say. As we saw earlier, sometimes if you make a mistake with your tenses, or you mix your tenses up in a sentence, it's difficult to know, are you talking about the past or are you talking about the present? So if you're making lots of mistakes, even if they're small mistakes, but if it's every sentence you say more or less there's a mistake in it, that undermines everything that you're saying. And again, if you make a mistake and the mistake is significant, so it affects the person's ability to understand what you're trying to tell them, then that will also obviously have a big impact on your score. How do you get the best result then? So I think this is a really good description here. Go into the IELTS speaking test as you would if you were doing a competitive sport. It's a competition. It's a competition with you. Okay, you're not competing against other people. You know, if everyone who takes the test the day you do, if everyone does excellently, you'll all get an excellent mark. So you're not competing in that sense. But where the competitive edge comes in is that it's for you to show off what you know. You show off the skills that you have practiced. And this comes back to it. Practice, practice, practice. Because you will have less than 15 minutes to show how well you can speak English. So, but when you think about it, you probably think it'll be the longest 15 minutes of my life. And it may feel like it during it. But we know 15 minutes is not a very long amount of time at all. So you only have that very short time to show how proficient you are, how well you can speak English. And what do athletes do? What do competitors do to prepare themselves for their big competitions? They practice, don't they? They practice over and over and over again. And this isn't about you preparing set phrases to say. It's not about thinking of a question, preparing an answer, memorizing it. So as soon as you hear the word family, you spill out everything you've prepared about family. No, it's not about that. But what it is about speaking, answering questions, thinking about the questions that you might be asked, and formulating an answer and saying it out loud. Often students make the mistake of thinking about a question that they might be asked in the speaking exam and writing an answer. It doesn't really help. It doesn't really help because this is not a written test. This is a speaking test. So we write differently to how we speak. In part 2 of the test, as we've seen, you will get a minute, literally 1 minute, to write some notes on what you're going to say about a topic. It's very important that you write keywords, things so you don't go blank. You know, often when we're nervous, we forget what we want to say. Oh, I just thought of something and then I've forgotten it a second later. So make sure you write down the key words that you want to say. Don't try and write whole sentences. That won't help you when you have to speak for 2 minutes. You don't have time in a minute to write a perfectly crafted sentence. So just write those key words. And you can practice doing that yourself before you go into the exam. Let's have a look at some of the things that you can do to get the best results in the exam. Have a look, you've got A to H on the screen. Are they all correct? Have a look at them. Which ones do you think are correct and which ones are not correct? Let's go through them then. Number 1, or A, use different tenses correctly. I think we know that's a given by now, don't we? You know, you are tested on your range of grammar and your accuracy. So yes, use different tenses, use them correctly. So this means even if the examiner asks you a question in the past or the present, try and follow up your initial answer with something in a different tense. Okay, so for example, you know, what do you do at the weekend? What do you usually do at the weekend? So you might say, oh, usually I go to play golf on a Saturday. And then your follow-up might be, and last weekend I went to a new golf course because my friend has just joined a new club. So I went to meet him to see what it was like. So you're answering in the present, but then you're bringing in another idea from the past to expand your answer and to show you know the difference between the present and the past when you're speaking. Read the newspaper the day before the exam. No, you do not need to have up-to-date encyclopedic knowledge of the news. You will not be asked about that in the exam. Use synonyms for words in the examiner's questions. Yes. So whatever the examiner asks you, try and use a different word when you're talking about it. So if the examiner asks you about what's your favourite book or tell me more about your favourite book, instead of using the word book, you might say novel or novella or autobiography or biography. You know, call it by its name rather than using generic book, for example. Speak very quickly. No. The examiners, it's not a race. No, we talked about athletes on the previous slide, but it's not a race to get to the end as quickly as you can. You're still going to be sat there for 11 to 14 minutes, regardless of how quickly you speak. And if you speak too quickly, what happens? You're going to make mistakes. Or even if you don't make mistakes, it can be difficult to understand what the person's saying. We don't talk in that way. We take natural breaks in our speech, in our rhythm of speech. When we're changing to a new idea, or if we're giving a list, we do it for emphasis. We also gives us a few seconds thinking time if we're not sure what to say next, or we're thinking of a word. So if you start off a breakneck speech, you're not going to be able to keep it up, and then the examiner will think, what is this person talking about? I can't understand what they're saying. No. Even I had trouble then keeping up with speaking very quickly. No, don't do it. Pronounce words correctly. Yes, we've talked about that. Making sure you've got the right word stress, but also in whole sentences, in clauses, that you have the proper intonation for the whole lot, as well as the individual words. Use long words, even if I'm not sure what they mean. No, no, no. Of course, show off if you know a long word. Just make sure that that word is appropriate in the context you're talking about, and that you say accurately. You know, they're the key rules. But if there's a word you sort of think, oh, I heard this word, but if you don't know what it means, or you're not quite sure, don't take the risk. The chances are, if you're not sure what it means, you won't use it in the correct context, or you won't say it correctly. So something that you're trying to do to make yourself look really good could actually end up being a significant mistake and could lose you marks. So really don't do this. Listen carefully to the questions. Absolutely. And throughout the test, read the question. Okay, so you will have a cue card here. So you will also be reading questions as well as hearing what the examiner's saying to you. It's very important. You must answer the question that you've been asked. Sounds quite simple. But sometimes, you know, when we're nervous, so if you hear the word hobby or food or family, don't then think, oh, I know what to say. But what has the examiner asked you? Has he asked you what? Has he asked you where? Has he asked you when? Has he asked you how? How often? What's your opinion on? Always listen to the question. Make sure. And if you miss something, if you think, ask the examiner to repeat the question. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Would you mind repeating it? The examiner won't mind. And this is why we would never recommend that you prepare answers. Yes, prepare things that you might say on a given topic. Make sure that you have vocabulary to describe the place where you live and your town or city, your favorite books, foods, hobbies, whatever it is. Make sure you have the vocabulary. But don't fall into the trap of just trying to learn off by heart a piece that you've written, because you run the risk then that you don't answer the question that the examiner has asked, the specific question. If he asks you when, he doesn't want to know what. So it's always important that you listen carefully, ask the examiner to repeat the question if you didn't quite catch it, and then make sure you structure your answer to answer the question. And this goes on to H. Try to memorize questions and answers before the exam. No. Not only will you make the mistakes I've just said, but also you waste a lot of time. How can you possibly craft and memorize every single subject that might come up in your IELTS test? You can't. It's impossible. You don't have time for that. And it's not what's required. This is about having a conversation with someone. I accept an artificial conversation, but it's a conversation all the same. So finally, what about you? We've gone through in this session what's expected, what things are measured in the IELTS test. Only you know yourself. This is the time to be honest with yourself. Which parts of the test do you think will be most difficult for you based on your learning journey up to now? Do you have problems with pronunciation? Have you got some weaknesses in your grammar? Do you know that you've got good vocabulary and you've got good grammar, but sometimes you struggle to put it all together in your brain before you speak? So sometimes it takes you a while to answer a question. What skills do you think you need to work on the hardest? My approach is always you aim for the best possible outcome. Even if you know that you only need a 5 for your immigration purposes, why aim for a 5? No, don't think, oh, it's okay, I can make some mistakes, I'll be fine. No. We should always aim for the best that we can do. Because what if you aim for a 5 and then you make even more mistakes than you intended on the day, and then you get a 4 or a 3 instead? Always aim for perfection, because you never know what's going to happen on the day. And how can you do that? How can you do this yourself? You know, one of the top tips here, you can practice on your own. Often students think, how can I do this on my own? I need to be speaking to somebody who speaks English fluently to really practice my speaking properly. And the truth is, you don't really at all. Yes, it helps. Of course it does. But you can also do it on your own. And how? How can you do that? Well, there's lots of information on the internet about the types of subjects that come up in the IELTS speaking test, and we've covered some of them in this session today. So go back over the session and look at some of the subjects that have come up here. You can also Google and you'll find lists on the internet of the typical subjects that come up in the IELTS test. And have a look at some of those and think about, what would I say? Okay, what kind of things have I got to say about each of these subjects? And think about the questions that someone might ask you. Even the most basic, start with the most basic question about what are you studying, or what job do you do? So think about what might the examiner ask you? What information have you got to say about your studies or your job? What you do, how long have you been doing it, what you like about it. And then record yourself. We've all got access to smartphones or on our laptops or tablets, the ability to record ourselves speaking. So do that as a first step. Just press record and talk about yourself. Talk about where you live, talk about your job and your studies, the area you live in. And talk, try and talk for 4 to 5 minutes. And when you've done that, stop and listen back. And I know that this is not a nice thing to do. Nobody likes hearing themselves on tape. But do it, because you will know when you're listening to yourself, you will be able to identify where your weaknesses are. Did you mix up your grammar? Can you understand what you're saying? Did you keep repeating the same words and phrases? Was there lots of hesitation? Were there gaps? Was there silence on the tape while you thought of the next thing to say? Were there lots of If you're not sure, ask a trusted friend or family member to listen to it and give you honest feedback as well. All of these things will really help you. Because the more we do this, the more we talk about the different things, the more natural it becomes. So it's really important. Don't leave it to a day or two before the test and then think, what do I say? Start from today. Start from today thinking about what you will say and saying it out loud. If you don't want to start recording straight away, because that's a step too far at this point, talk to yourself in the mirror. And you'll be able to see yourself, and you'll be able to hear it as you say things. You'll be able to hear the intonation, the flow of your speech. So even as a first step, that can really help. And then move on to the recording, because it is invaluable and you will pick up where your weaknesses are. And once you've identified your weaknesses, then you know where to concentrate. You know where you've got more work to do. Whether that's going back to doing some vocabulary work, whether that's going back to some of your grammar books. If you're not sure, it doesn't sound right, the grammar, the way you're using the tenses, do I need to go back? Am I using the same connecting word over and over again? What other connecting words are there? Any of those types of things will all help you. And every time you've done some work, practice again. Do it again. Record yourself again.